Hello and welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast with me, your host, Johnny Vedmore. And I'm here today with Minnie Chow, who's a little Hitler cat. And I'm here with a good friend, someone who I've got to know, especially over the past year. We've interacted on many occasions. I love him from the bottom of my heart. Josh Walkos, man, thanks for coming on the NEWSPASTE Podcast. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. Always good to see you. I'm doing well, man. Ready to get this going.
Yeah, you have been a busy man, but for those who don't know about where you come from and what you're doing, give a little bit about your life, however long you want, my friend. How did you get to the point where you become an independent journalist?
Hmm. Basically, just getting fed up with being told lies and looking into it myself and discovering that they are indeed lies. 95% of the time, you turn on the TV or you open up a newspaper. But the way I really got into it, just to actually put stuff out there and start writing about it, was started doing Twitter threads. This was right after COVID and after Musk had bought Twitter. So I started doing basically threads that were dispelling COVID myths about the COVID vaccines, about how masks don't actually stop viruses, about the lockdowns, about pretty much everything you can go down the line that we were completely propagandized and lied to about during those years. And it touched a nerve on a lot of people, started, sharing it and giving me feedback. And I thought that maybe I should start writing on my own. And I started a Substack. It's called We the Free .substack.com, and started adopting some of my threads into actual articles and expanding upon them and just writing independently as well. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there. You know what I mean? I mean, I've always been into, I hate to say the word, but alternate history or some revisionist history, because you do get a sense that we're always lied to. And starting clear back in 9/11, it's really what kind of sparked me to question everything, so to speak. And it just came to that point where I figured, I got a pretty good knowledge base, a lot of research that I've conducted and compiled, and I have, just sitting there that I should put to good use and share it with the world, and just have been extremely pleasantly surprised, that people actually like my writing, and, the feedback's pretty much positive.
You got monster threads, that's for sure. When you started off, did you just aim to just do normal everyday threads and then they just expanded out and then eventually become articles? Is that what your
Yeah,
experience
I
has
mean,
been?
with the Twitter threads, the first one I wrote was about the COVID vaccine. So basically, that was just adopting all the different scientific research to prove that they aren't safe, and the mRNA just doesn't work the way that they say it is, and just included all those into the thread, and it kind of kept on growing, and then giving my editorial kind of viewpoint aspect on it as well. And I'm known for also giving a pretty good background history that leads up to the present, so you can kind of see how things have unfolded and where we've been lied to and the politics of things of that nature. Yeah, so that's basically how I did it. And just like I said, I couldn't really believe the amount of people who actually responded to it and shared it. And, I got asked to write for a couple other publications, and recently had an art, or not an article, but a chapter in a book called Canary in a Post-COVID World, which kind of shocked me, because I didn't ever think I'd be, an author, so to speak. But again, I'm just as shocked as anybody that, like, I'm even here talking to you about my work, because I never expected really anybody to get any eyes on it, and it just continues to kind of get better and better.
It's amazing how the experience, isn't it? I mean, threads are really good for teaching people how to write articles, because you have to go in an order. Usually,
Right,
like
right.
for me personally, I go back within history a lot, so I tend to go in chronological order and just try and keep it as
I have a
chronological
similar
as
style that way
possible.
as well.
You have to, like, sometimes you have to like move to a different subject and start the chronology again. But mostly you kind of just have that, like, writing in thread form teaches you how to communicate each part and what it was. It's well, I was going out with a girl in about 2006, and we were living in Lyon, and she was studying English, and I was looking at some of the things she was doing, and one of the things was how to take an article and make it smaller, sort of take away parts and find the main points and take away
Mm-hmm.
all of the buffer words and create it as small. And I always say to people, that's, or I've said to people who have asked this, you want to be able to communicate in long form and short form. But for me, I've done the opposite. You sound like you've gone short form growing outwards. I went long form and I'm trying to go inwards, and that's quite hard for me.
Well, I mean, depends on what you're trying to convey, and like, there's an economy of words you can use that you do when you go through and edit something. You're like, well, that could usually, from what I've read, is like, you want to have, you don't want to have as much fluff, so to speak, and you can condense it and to make it more of a concise thing that people can digest, and it doesn't get overly wordy to where they get lost in like the weeds. So as you're editing it, yeah, I'm usually going through and just cutting, like, I don't even really need to say that. It sounds kind of, I'm injecting too much of my own opinion or viewpoint into it. And it's just a constantly evolving process. But again, to your point, sometimes you want to have a long form where you're just kind of stream of consciousness, and it really touches in on what your style is and what your point of view is as well. And people like that as well. But with the Twitter threads, I love the aspect of the multimedia aspect where you can incorporate clips and videos and things of that nature. Not that you can't do that with your writings as well these days, but I just think people respond whenever you have a lot of pictures and screenshots and things of that nature that reinforces what you're saying. That way they know that you're not feeding them a lot of bullshit and there's actually proof. And obviously the key to maintaining that as far as your readership is to provide sources for everything, so they know that they can reverse engineer it, go back and say, I don't really believe that, I'm skeptical with that, and then confirm it with their own eyes, which I think writers don't give people enough credit that people actually go and do that. You know what I mean? And I felt that's how I kind of gained some type of recognition, because people were actually following all these sources that I would link into the threads and like being like, holy shit, they actually don't use placebos in vaccine trials for childhood schedule. Like, that's actually true. And, you can actually see it for yourself, just compiling the information for people.
Yeah, it's an awesome process to go through, and like what I'm interested in personally might not be what all of the audience is interested in, because I mean we're going to talk about your most recent article today, that's out on Zero Hedge. So you've got to the point where you're writing for a pretty big publication now. You're getting up there. So obviously that time you've put in and effort has been noted by, as you say, more than one person. Do you see a book coming eventually?
It's always been in the back of my mind, because you're probably similar, where if I'm not writing, like, my hobby is to research, right? So like, I like doing that. So I'm always making notes in separate note files and like different threads that I might potentially do something in the future, or like information I come across, it seems interesting to me, that I'll just put a placeholder on. And then whenever it comes to writing something, I will scour through a lot of it just to kind of see where it might fit into, because you always have kind of a subconscious aim as to what you want to write about or what you're interested in. And it sort of like, what's the word for it? Like the muse, it kind of directs you into that direction based upon the research that you've done. And basically, for Zero Hedge, I just did a huge compilation on the like childhood placebo myth. So people are usually under the impression that whenever you get your kids jabbed, that these vaccines that they're giving them have went through rigorous studies and post-marketing surveillance to ensure that these are all very safe and effective, as they say. But come to find out, and this is what really kind of put me down this kind of public health kind of, where I aim a lot of my writings, is that they don't do any innate or inert saline placebos in any of these trials. Like, when you ask somebody what a placebo is, they say, yeah, it's something that is not going to be bioactive in the body, and they compare it to whatever they're giving the person, right? Let's see what the effects are. Well, with every single one of them that we give children here in America, at least, none of them have been tested with an inert saline placebo. They call them active comparators. I call them bioactive, comparators, whatever you want to use, but or they've been compared to another vaccine. So I mean, think about the logic in that. But those vaccines that they compare it to also were not tested with an inert saline placebo. So how can you say that they're safe and effective? And we also have an epidemic of autoimmune diseases. American children are the most unhealthy in the world right now. It's not just what I think of as vaccines, but it's a cumulative effect of everything they're exposed to in their world now, including technology. But I do think that it is a big piece that needs to be looked at, and that's why I wrote it, to kind of coincide the release with the hearing that's going on with RFK now. And I lay out kind of some policy things that he could put forth that I think ultimately, if he actually were able to do this, and I'm highly skeptical that the pushback would be tremendous with the forces behind pharmaceutical industry. That I got some pushback from readers saying that we need to just say that they're all safe and pull them off the market, but that's not a pragmatic way to go about it. I'm convinced that if they did put in these policy measures, that they would find that, holy shit, we do have to eliminate the liability protection and put a complete pause and redo everything if you want to have actual safe vaccines.
There needs to be the element of them having to look at the evidence, present the evidence in a format that everybody will accept, not just them and their shareholders, and the government policy advisors who get paid by them or their shareholders. And there's a lot. Let's not jump too far in, because we'll talk about that, because that article is and this time we're living in is a crazy time. I mean, we have seen some crazy stuff happen over the past year, especially, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. You keep going back and you go, wow, it has been nonstop. And you mentioned, September the 11th was something that broke your paradigm. Now, you also said something else. It made me think of something else you said made me think of about being a researcher. Made me think of a girl in a police audit I was doing the other day. I was out with a camera, and I was recording police interactions. Come across a guy with a load of people on top of him on the floor. Was perfect thing to record in Cardiff City Centre. And this one girl who was involved in the whole melee got really pissed off with me, and she come across at me at one point and said, "Can I ask you honestly, is this what you do as that, oh, look at this petty thing you're just recording on the street or whatever?" And I said, "Oh no, I'm actually investigative journalist. I write long form articles, blah 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 blah." But what I really felt was oh, actually, no. What I love to do is even more boring and mundane than this, because researching, it takes a long time, doesn't it? I mean, you've got to go through a lot. You just got to keep going through dead end after dead end after dead end when you've got.
And you have to like to read. Right? That's the key. You know what I mean? You have to read.
Yeah. So there's kind of two questions. The first being, was it different before? And this is something that's interesting for me, because before I actually started writing, I could feel my whole sense of like a security activation device in my brain that stopped me from going across the precipice and becoming a journalist. It stopped me by saying, you love to research and look into it, but when you get to that certain point where you can feel it's going to change your paradigm, just let's not tackle that then. Were you like that before September the 11th, or was there another time? What was the moment where, was it COVID that kind of brought, did you have that same experience?
Well, I've always written. I used to actually write about music. I'm a huge music fan, have been my entire life, and I wrote for a couple websites in the early aughts, basically going to shows, reviewing stuff, and reviewing albums, interviewing bands, things of that nature. So I've always had that kind of urge to write and express myself in multiple different type of ways. But when you say you had a safety helmet on, you mean like it was basically like a mind block that told you not to
felt like it'd been put in place
about things?
I think I remember there was a couple of moments in my life where it was just, I know I've got to stop looking now, because if I look, then everything changes.
Okay.
it was only after getting over that suddenly I was able to really research, really write, really look beyond it. And I was wondering if you had a similar
Well, when it
experience.
comes to like shattering of paradigms, like I said, 9/11 was that, and that's whenever I really started getting a keen interest into, because there's, from the naked eye watching that event, anybody who's being honest is going to say, hey, there's just something completely off about this. How did this happen? You know what I mean? There's a history of how,
Tora
this
Bora
led
Cave,
up to
mate.
it, right?
Tora Bora Cave, tell you.
Tora Bora, right, right. And not like all the hijackers, they supposedly were living in a cave, and they put together the most elaborate terrorist attack
Pretty
in the
good.
history of the world.
I mean,
But
super
that
fun
was like,
film.
I was like, wait a second here. I started questioning the news and everything, and that just really cracked my skull open in that regard. To like, man, we are living in like a controlled reality here. If this can go through, and we're going to go to war because of this, and ruin lives, mortgage our futures, and just that's when you started seeing the underlying criminal enterprise in my mind. And that's, at that point I wasn't writing about it, but at that point I was like, holy shit, I got to tell everybody I know about this. And I was ignorant to the fact, like you said, that people have that safety helmet on where they don't want to hear that shit. You know what I mean? If you're going to try and change what they already think that they know, they see that as a threat to their ego. And I received tons, I still do, but I became the conspiracy theorist to my friends and family. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, you have to see what happened here. Do you know how much it takes to actually learn to fly a plane at that angle, at that speed, into the Pentagon, as they say they're going to do? Do you realize the skill that takes? Like all these other things that were going along with 9/11. And we could speak for days on the anomalies and the background of it and all that stuff. But that's whenever I started realizing, well, people do not want to hear this. And it hurts you, because you're like, I thought, we were cool. I thought we were friends and family. Like, we're open-minded. We can exchange ideas. And I always had the urge to, going back to the music thing, the reason I wrote about music, because I love sharing it with people, like things that I like, and that's new, and things that excite me. And that kind of translates into writing about this kind of stuff, is because people like you and I, we're finding things that people don't conventionally know. It's their hidden truths. They're truths nonetheless, but we have to go out and find them and piece things together to then convey that message to people, to create a common knowledge of the actual truth. So I like telling people things that maybe it blows their mind. That's why I'm like on X, like that's why I get a lot of followers, and because I'm presenting information that they're like, holy shit, this can't be real. You know what I mean? There's no way it's real. And they're like, holy shit, it is real. And that plants seeds in other people's minds that then can open them up and hopefully inspire them to tell everybody about things that they're learning. And that's how you actually can create, even though we can't like, you can't measure the change. In a sense you can, though, because conspiracy theories are mainstream now, you know what I mean, because of the internet and things like that. But I just love the fact that you can, through research and compiling all this stuff, and you're not going to find a truth initially. It's going to come to you, like after you've pieced together a lot of different pieces. You always have that moment like, oh, that's what's happening here. And with your writing, it's manifest when I read the shit that you write, because you're an actual investigative journalist, where you're going into files and history of people's families and stuff. And that is impressive, of the patience that it takes to be able to write that stuff compared to what I write.
There was so many different things I thought about when you were speaking there. One of them was a guy called Chris I used to work with in a shop called Dixon's back in the day. And I started working in Dixon's on September 11th, 2002. So it was a year after. I remember it was all over the radio on my first day, the anniversary of 9/11. And that year had been crazy. And I remember I was
7/7 bombing too, right?
yeah, well, that was coming. Yeah. It was that was a few years later. It was a few
Okay.
years later. So that was about 2005, 6.
Mm-hmm.
And with this one guy who worked in the shop, he got desperately enthralled within the conspiracies as they started to come out about 9/11. It was probably about a year before or Loose Change come out that you
Hmm.
really saw suddenly there's all this information happening, and you realize, oh, this whole thing was so much more than what
Hmm.
we can think. And we see it, each bit of information, like it backs up what your suspicions and beliefs are. And this one guy I know got so scared, so terrified, and he was sending me message after message like, oh no, you don't understand, this is what they've done. And he got so aggressive that it made me actually like not want to look into these things,
Hmm.
because he was so manic, because he was so afraid. But he was right to be. But the problem is that when we first find out all of this stuff and we tell people who are just not ready for it, it
Hmm.
just it often has the opposite effect. It like pushes them away. And so going to what you were saying there, that's the reason why I was trying to always find a way to bypass that. And I find the best way is by looking into family histories and the histories that come before. People are much more likely to be interested in taking in negative information about Klaus Schwab's paternal like ancestry than they are about Klaus Schwab himself. It's
Hmm.
strange how it's like that. It's almost like a sneaky way in. You want to tell people about the past, and they see the same thing that happened to reoccur in the future. And that's what we try and do as journalists. I know you do it in different ways, but like that process, let's talk just before we get on to the article proper. Let's talk about that process, because for me, what I try and tell people is I dragnet information. So to do the articles that I do, I go back and you get quicker at doing this over time. So what used to take a week now takes probably a few hours for me.
Hmm.
I'll go through certain sites. I'll get all the newspaper archive records, anything I can find in any archive, old website backup data, anything I can find. I put into chronological order, and it tells me the story. I start writing about little bits of source that I have, source material,
Hmm.
so I'm always basing things on sources as I go along. What is your technique like? What do you do when you write?
Very similar to what you just said. It's I create a master file of whatever topic this might be about. It might not be about the main topic that I'm writing on, but it could be tangentially connected to it. And I have like my notes app in my iPhone is just crazy with all the different information that I'm going through. Like you said, go into the history of it, finding all kinds of articles, making sure that you're saving the information is the key, right? When you're researching. So creating a file for it. And what usually I'll read through, and if something interests me that's within the article, I'll pull the quote, put it in there, maybe write some thoughts just about it, or a note to notate that as, hey, this might fit in here, or this aspect of it. And then also I'm big into doing uh, footnotes research. So like if there's a topic I want to go and write about that I'm interested in, I will find every book that I can find on it, possibly online, right? Create a bookmark folder for those books, and then go through. You don't even necessarily see people when you say read. You don't have to read linearly. Like you start at the book and you just read the book and then you're done with the book, right? I go in, I look at the topics in the chapters, and I'll go back. I'll read one particular chapter, or then look at the footnotes there, follow those footnotes maybe to somewhere that's linked to online, right? And then compile all the information in a logical manner, like you said, that usually starts with the history and moves up to the present, and the reason that you're writing about it, and just have like a master file for it. Then when I sit down to actually compile the thread or the article, I have that on another screen, or beside me. That way I can reference it, and it just triggers you writing too. Whenever you want to get the writing done, and just sit down and think about it, and just let it go, not worrying about that. Like you might have errors within it, because you always got to go back and edit it and that kind of thing. But
Yeah, that
that's
that took
really
me a long time to get over at the start. I constantly wanted to always correct things as I went along, and it stops the flow of finding the information when you're in research mode.
Right. And whenever you're trying to organize your own thoughts in order to convey them when to the reader as well, that's another aspect to it. I was the same way too. I wanted to do spell check and shit and just completely bog myself down into minutia that detracts from what I'm trying to do in the first place. So I've gotten a lot more like liberal with just the process of it and not overthinking it, because what I find is like it organically comes together whenever you're genuinely interested into something, right?
Mm.
Not don't force it. Like I said, I have tons and tons of information that I've compiled that I don't know what I'm going to do with yet, but I know that I'm interested in it, and I know that I can reference that
Mm.
at some point in the future.
Mm. Oh, I love this. I love this because this is something that I think that all writers should benefit from, all investigative journalists, all of us, all of us in our pool. We should be doing. I had a wonderful experience. I mean, I met a man. He was a wonderful man. We had fish and chips together, and his name was Darren Kenton. Still is. Still, his name still is Darren Kenton, which is
He's
a good
still with us.
sign. He's still with us. He's a good boy, and he's so good at researching Fabians, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to tackle individual Fabians, maybe. I want to
Okay.
tackle individual people. He wants to tackle Fabianism. And that is like that's where we separate.
Mm-hmm.
But as he was finding, like, as he finds more information, he's finding more information about individual stories, and individual stories make
Right.
me go, that's sweet. That's some nice stuff. And there's a lot in there within something like Fabianism. And that's what led eventually to both the Third Way articles and the Third Culture article, is a research over a year and a half period on a subject that was interesting. And it was like, well, we're going to find something in here eventually. And then the points eventually become clear to you once you've got
Mm-hmm.
enough sources, enough other things, you start to see the bigger picture. And that's the
I just
article.
realized I didn't answer your question when you asked, is there a book in the works, right? That's
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
asked, and I went off on that tangent. But that is always in the back of my mind. And I think I have compiled a lot of things, not only with my writing on X in my Substack, but just within my research and notes. It hasn't crystallized in my mind, but I do have an inkling that there could be something there in the future, right? I don't have a book deal or anything like that. You don't really need them these days, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there is something there that could be a wider historical book about things like Fabianism, New World Order kind of stuff, and like the way that healthcare and control mechanisms.
Mm.
We're interested in a lot of very similar topics. So
Oh, you're gonna like an article I have coming out on Friday, which I've released a like sneak peek, but you did, no one will get a. It's called The Tale of Two Farrars, and it's about
Jeremy Farrar,
Jeremy
right?
Farrar, and
Mhm.
then my search back into his ancestry, which is just wild, really wild. And
Is his
I'm
whole family in the club
oh,
historically?
it's so hard. You see, Jeremy Farrar's father was born to two parents who were 52 years old. Now, I'm not sure people know, but there's a big drop-off rate in births,
Mm-hmm. So
and
that
they
explains
had,
what's wrong with him.
yeah, yeah, maybe sixth child as well. That was Jeremy Farrar's sixth child. His father, Eric Farrar, was born in 1917 during the war, and something smells fishy about it. His supposed parents had previously had like another 4 or 5 kids and stopped having kids 11 years before, and and then suddenly this kid's born, and it doesn't make any sense. And I started to look into it, and at the same time, just coincidentally, I'm looking through the Wellcome Trust stuff. I was writing the Wellcome 5 article when I first started
Mm-hmm.
writing this article now. So this has been like 3 years of research. There's gonna be multiple parts to it. It's extremely interesting, that's for sure. I went back into history and just came across something. It was a paper in from 1911 called Plague in Manchuria by a man called Reginald and Strufer Farrar.
Mm-hmm.
And he was basically the exact same position as Jeremy Farrar is now, but in 1910, 1911 for the British. So bizarre. Like,
Hmm.
exactly the same. Went over, studied viruses in the Far East, just like Jeremy Farrar did, and other things. I mean, it just, it shows you that most of the vaccine, the ideas behind vaccination, mass vaccination, behind protocols around these sort of things will all come up with in an international symposium in 1911 in China. That was the first time that all of the main virologists or etc. from around the world had come together. So the
Hmm.
Americans had a Rockefeller representative called Dr. Strong. Zabolotny went over for the Russians. Kitasato Shibasaburo went for the Japanese, one of the most evil men in history. Dr. Wu, who invented the N95 masks, was the one hosting the symposium. And Reginald Anstruther Farrar came over for the British. And I've done a load of research, and the parallels between their lives are insane. And then there's a second part which I think explains the why he was put with other members of the family,
Hmm.
why young Eric Farrar had to, and that goes into the bedchambers of kings and queens, including Queen Victoria, which is just amazing story.
That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it comes out
And
on
also,
Friday.
I mean,
Oof.
you do a really good job of illustrating that this is generational shit that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like people have a hard time like they immediately jump to like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory because but when you scratch under the surface of all these individuals who are present in our lives today, right? And out there in front of all these things, like you said, all you got to do is look back in time and where they came from and who members of their family was. And invariably, you're going to find that it's all connected. You
Mhm.
know, they're all connected and they're all in the big club, as we like to say, and we're not in it. You know what I
Well,
mean?
this guy's definitely in a few clubs. Reginald Anstruther Farrar was definitely a Freemason, advertised in the paper. So
Mm-hmm.
we know which clubs these guys are involved in, and there's more to it. I mean, at the end of the day, all of this again leads to more Fabianism. That's one of the things that
Yeah, and
um,
like Fabianism is something that I'd say 90% of the public have probably never even heard that word, right? And people
frogs
don't
don't
understand it.
hear they're being cooked in the water
That's
slowly, do they?
people just don't know like what that the wolf in sheep's clothing was their symbol, right? Or it
Hmm.
still is their symbol,
Yeah.
basically. And that tells you everything you need to know about that organization. And a lot of the things that they've worked over the years to implement are made manifest today. You know, if you know where to look and what their end goals are and what they're trying to do. So, I mean, I think that's awesome that you've kept that thread with the underlying Fabianism that has been going through our, from England into the United States. All these people are connected. You want to say a socialist, like use that word, but it's a lot more nuanced than what people
Mhm.
think as far as the long-term goals that are being implemented through the genealogy that you're so well at uncovering.
That's why it led to the Third Way article. I mean, Bill Clinton, and Larry Summers, Robert Reich, they're all kind of from the same ilk as the Fabians, and they infused all of the Fabians in Britain. People like Yvette Cooper, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and others to act and create something that was partly driven by third way politics. But enough of that. Enough of that. We want to talk a bit about what you've been up to recently. So you gave a little bit of a a sneak peek to it earlier, but you've been writing about a man who you quite rightly mention is divisive in many ways, and you know my opinions on him. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
completely rose. I don't always wear. I don't know what's the opposite of rose tinted glasses. Dark glasses or rose tinted glasses. I am very nuanced, and I do accept fully well that the this is a complicated character who has the possibility to do very good things at the moment. I
Mm-hmm.
am well aware of that, and I am someone who believes that I am willing to give that as a give a chance to a guy like that. So explain a little bit about your article that you've released on Zero Hedge.
Yeah, it's just about RFK getting the nomination for the HHS secretary, which is a huge, powerful role. HHS, I think it's like over like $1 trillion budget or something crazy every. I mean, all the agencies underneath it, like CDC, FDA, it's a umbrella organization, is enormously powerful in personal lives of Americans based on the policies that they implement, right? And they have just done a terrible job. I mean, as most people can agree, and it's like a sieve for our money, and it's actually hurting people and harming people more than anything. And I think they're based on the history of RFK, and I've read a lot of his stuff and followed him for quite a while, based on his views, mostly on vaccinations and like chemicals and things like that, environmental issues he's dealt with. So I think he's uniquely. I'm trying. How should I put this? I am trying to wear some rose-colored glasses here. You know what I mean? Because I also am skeptical of pretty much every politician out there, and have a cynical view of what they might or might not do. But with this particular nomination, I think that there is a way forward that he might be able to move the needle. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets in there and he just becomes, part of the blob like the rest of them as well. You know what I mean? But I'm allowing myself some optimism in this issue, because I think sometimes you need to have some type of optimism. Whether you're just going to be blackpilled the rest of your life, and just cynicism also can destroy critical thought as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the article is just about the opportunity that is in front. What I think some of the things that he could do, mainly put a moratorium on the childhood vaccines schedule. Okay.
Okay.
And there's a lot of other things with the scope of this role, but that's kind of where I focus.
We'll go through each of them. There's two. So there's two questions. First question is, what do you think of RFK Jr. Externally to this potential role? And the second question is, what does a moratorium really mean? What type of moratorium, and how far is? Because that sounds like a perfect start.
Yeah. As far as what do you mean? What I think of him externally, just like from
From externally of this issue, like separate from this issue, how do you feel about RFK Jr. as a character personally?
well, I mean, he's comes from one of the most basically an oligarchical family in America, so that's one thing. I mean, I have basically followed him through the health lens. I know that there are some issues from a personal perspective that he's had with people, and he has not been truthful with some of the past things that's happened. And so, I mean, I'm willing to set aside some of the things that might have like bother me in that way, similar to Trump too. I think Trump is doing some good things too, and I'm not trying to be a friend with Trump or with RFK. I'm looking from a policy perspective where he can get some shit done, possibly if you can within the system that we have. So, I mean, he seems like an honest broker on the issue that I'm interested in, which is the vaccine issue and healthcare. They make America healthy again is like kind of like their slogan. But he seems to have his finger on the pulse of a lot of the things that are problematic within our society, as far as healthcare and vaccines and the FDA and just the overall role that it has in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it's a fair point. I mean, I got my opinions of his different. I've said enough about.
I mean, you might know shit I don't know about him because, like I said, you go to deep dive in the people's background. So,
well, I just there are a few points that bring up that are probably like for anybody listening at home, if you want to have a bit of also the critical thinking side of RFK's character personally, just personally. There's a few things that I find interesting. One of them is the fallacy people use. Oh, he would never be part of intelligence because intelligence killed his father and his uncle is a completely ridiculous idea. That's more likely if the most powerful members and the most important members to you of your family have been murdered publicly, you're less likely, in my opinion, to want to go in against them, especially if you've had a load of drug addiction and somehow been connected with them over time. I find it interesting that a lot of his work has been in environmentalism. That's something which, there's lots where there's a lot of people, including people like Fox Green and the Space Commune gang, say, he's been so anti-nuclear power, and nuclear power really is the way to, help power the whole of the
I agree.
of America. But he's been along the establishment lines with that. Or I find it very interesting that he went to Harvard, that he
Hmm.
took a year out, and Roger Ailes, who was very much still a Republican leaning back then, took him under his wing during that year out, and they went and supposedly made a movie about falconry and etc.
Hmm.
But I'm suspicious about those moments when recruitment is most likely to happen. When I was looking at
Right.
RFK
Yeah.
Jr. and
Yeah.
following through, I was like, when's the most likely time for him to be recruited? Oh, during this moment where he takes a year out with this guy who's hanging around in political circles, and he's going to be an important propagandist
I mean,
later
Harvard's a
on in the
hotbed of
future.
recruitment
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
right?
and it's a hotbed of CIA recruitment, and maybe that's why he went there. I mean, when you talk about his family, it's true, oligarchical family on both sides. I've done a load of his family trees now. I'll be doing a who do they think they are about them
Hmm.
eventually, which looks back, and of course, the one side's Kennedy, very Irish, seeing if I can find anything juicy down there. But the
I'm
other
sure you
side
will.
ends up, yeah, well, your family life is always like that. The other side ends up in Prussian royalty. And so that goes into something that's something else as well, because his
Okay.
father married into that line. So he is more than just one line. There's a very establishment tint to him. And he's had all of those different things with Epstein, all the different links. He was over El Brillo Way quite a lot. He doesn't talk about that. He says he likes to say he only caught the plane twice, once to go fossil hunting and once just allowed to use for
Hmm.
itself. But then I found him during one of those occasions on a dinner table next to Jeffrey Epstein, in a ballroom for some event. So he wasn't just fossil hunting. There was other things going on, and it was a longer period. So I'm suspicious about all of those things. He was still in touch with them by 2015, 16. So even after Epstein's out in the public, Ghislaine Maxwell's still linked with him quite heavily. And of course, there's all the stuff with his personal life, his many affairs and all of this. But, humans will be humans. If these are loads of extramarital affairs with people who are of his age and etc., it's just like,
Hmm.
well, humans are humans. So I'm not even that worried about what his morality looks like when it comes to being faithful. I don't. It's pretty clear he's not. He's a naughty boy,
Hmm.
but there's plenty of naughty boys in the world. Naughty boys keep the world turning, I'm afraid. And so,
So
uh, go
you
on.
take a far more skeptical view that he would be able to, or he will do anything that I would say, like in the article or that approach. And I think those are all fair criticisms. And again, this me writing about this was a way to expose people to specifically the fact that there is no saline placebos with childhood vaccine uh, trials. Um, but again, I just hope the moratorium thing is a kind of pie in the sky. Like if I could go shopping and get whatever anything I want, I realize how difficult and how much pushback they would if they tried to actually introduce this to the public. And you said going back, you said what would the moratorium look like? I mean, it's basically like they did on the gain of function, right? They supposedly did back in 2014. You stop it. You stop all vaccines. You do a reassessment, a true independent commission, which is also very hard to actually get as well, with all the levers that govern the people in interest. So I'm highly skeptical they'll be able to do it, but I want to get that out there because it's something I think people should be thinking about, and just educating themselves about as far as what you're injecting into your children, which is
Yeah,
a
most
big issue
definitely.
for me.
Hey, this is why I mean, all of those. I'm just naming all of those things as things that people can take into account. They don't have to bundle everything in, and no one's just all black or white. You know, there's nuance between, even the worst people do good things during their lifetime as well.
Hmm.
And like I'm aware that if there's any time I'd want RFK Jr. to start being a good person, would be now for this period of time, and
Hmm.
let's see what we get at the end, because we could get something good out of this. I don't think he. I think he will. He won't push for a full moratorium, because what would be a full moratorium? Would that just be all vaccines are stopped in the US until a correct safety protocol independently from the pharmaceutical industry has happened?
Well, that's the thing, is it would be nearly impossible to actually stop it, at this point, because of the funds and everything that's been out there. So there'd have to be some type of period of time where eventually they would be stopped. But also, you said in pharmaceutical companies doing the studies, I want independent
Mhm.
studies, you know what I mean? Because pharmaceutical companies, they are the ones that our regulators are relying on to provide data that we're supposed to believe, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
there's all kind of shit that goes on whenever they're trying to present data to the FDA. They can omit data if it doesn't work, in their favor. There's billions of dollars in these products. But the moratorium, if I had my way, would be a complete halt to all the everything that's on the childhood schedule, and that includes the COVID-19 vaccine, which amazingly made it onto the schedule, even though it's completely worthless and highly dangerous.
Wow. Wow.
And the reason it did get on the schedule is because a lot of people aren't aware is anytime you call it a vaccine, you put it on the schedule, you as a manufacturer get blanket liability protection. Meaning, if I inject that into my son and he gets autism or something happens, he dies or has huge issues, which, all these parents will tell you, they can tell the difference before and after, you know what I mean? Whenever this happens, when there's onset of like spectrum of autism going, they just aren't the same kid. Well, you are suing the HHS whenever you do that. And they have their own separate vaccine court, extrajudicial court that isn't even within the criminal justice system that they set up for them as well. So, I mean, it's just the absolute absurdity of the system that was built. How can it be safe and effective if you're giving them blanket liability? Uh, there's no other industry in the entire world that is afforded this type of protection. And why do they need protection in the first place? Because people were suing the hell out of them in the 70s and 80s because their kids were getting hurt by their products. So they went to the Congress and said, "Hey, we're just going to have to stop making these because we're going to be sued into oblivion, and it's going to hurt our bottom line basically, and we'll just stop manufacturing them." So in 1986, they had the National Injury Vaccine Compensation Act. I might have got that wrong, but you get the idea. And that is what established this new regulatory apparatus around it, which basically says, hey, as long as you keep making these vaccines, and by the way, there was, I think, 5 in the 60s or in 1970s, and now it's 72 different doses that the kids are getting, right? So you can see as soon as that 86 Act went into effect and the manufacturers were like, wow, we can just keep making different vaccines because we're not going to get sued for them. All of a sudden, public health comes out and says, oh, we need to have this vaccine on schedule, this vaccine, this vaccine.
Yeah,
And now, like I said, before they're 18 years old, they have 72 doses
oh
of
my
various
God.
vaccines that
Oh
have
my.
all these adjuvants in them that haven't been properly tested against this inert saline placebo. Almost all of them have been tested against another vaccine or a vaccine that has the virus part taken out of it, that
Mhm.
still has the adjuvants in it. And they're saying that these are safe and effective. So as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this because the absurdity of how we even got into this position to where you're putting these in newborn babies. You know what I mean? Like that's fucking evil.
The game is definitely
That's
fixed,
allowed.
isn't it? It's
Yeah.
completely rigged in their favor, and it needs to. So I mean, you talked in the first part about mandating independent safety reviews. What would
Mhm.
that look like? Who would take that responsibility?
And that's a great question. I mean, you'd have to have somebody who's in charge of selecting the right
Shall we get
individuals.
Henry Kissinger, AI Henry Kissinger, to do it?
Yes. Actually, we should just let ChatGPT or DeepSeek do it for us,
Yeah,
right?
oh,
They
that'd be
get to
good.
choose, which is where we're heading, right? Where they'll
Yeah.
just pass the moral buck on the AI for everything.
Mhm.
But it's a good question. I think there's an individual, his name's Peter Doshi. He works for the BMJ, who he's a scientist. He's been outspoken about this issue for years and years. I
BMJ
think
is the British Medical Journal, yeah?
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
which has its issues too, but it has also, compared to some of the other ones like New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, and things like that, they have actually published things that are critical of the processes
Mhm.
that I'm talking about with hard evidence and scientific studies. So I think he would be an interesting individual to get to lead this commission, to put together the studies with the methodologies, and we're talking about doing science basically, right? And you want to do vax versus unvax studies as well. That's never been done. They don't know the cumulative effect of all these vaccines because they're giving you five to seven different doses at a time with some of these different types of vaccines. And I wish I was more aware of this before my kids
Unbelievable.
got these, because I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
I was
yeah.
weary of it, and we put them on a schedule that was stretched out because it's just common sense to think this little baby, its immune system is developing. Why would you inject all these things in it all at once and risk having like a reaction? You don't know, predispositions and things of that nature with their immune system. So we did it one at a time over a longer period, which I think is a smart way to go these days, or just opt out altogether, in my opinion, at this point. But they have never done studies of the cumulative effects of the different adjuvants and the mercury that they had in these vaccines
Mm-hmm.
before, which again should be mind blowing to people. We're making these things a prerequisite for them to even go to school,
Mm-hmm.
and you're putting it in the most precious commodity we have, which is the children that we're raising for the future. So, and if you just open your eyes and look around, autism is 1 in 50 now. 1 in 50 kids. There was no autism as we know it today in like the 50s and 60s. It just
Mm-hmm.
didn't exist. People will say, oh, well, we didn't have the way to diagnose it, things of that nature. No, there is no nonverbal uh, individuals on a mass scale that completely need to be treated like a baby into adulthood. You know what I mean? Back in the 50s and
100%.
60s.
100%. I mean, I talked about this with Dr. Heath, the psychiatrist who used to come on to TNT radio a lot. And we had one conversation on there about autism, and it has to be accepted that there is um uh, he said it's not necessarily that it's a lot more diagnosis and stuff. But he said some of the rate increase, and I do agree with this, is the fact that so many people have found it trendy to become autistic. They're like, "Ooh, I've got a little bit of this, I got a little bit of that. I can't work out
I'm
maths
on the
so well.
spectrum.
I'm on the
Well,
spectrum," and there's
an
been a bit
interesting
of that
fact
still.
is the transgender craze is
Hmm.
a large percentage of the kids who fell into that ideology were autistic, and they were
Yeah,
essentially preying on
I
their
believe it too.
neurodivergence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, but that's what I mean. That's what we do. We look for a solution to why we are the way we are. I had this conversation yesterday actually with someone about when I was about 26, 27. I was dying. I was 8.5 stone. I couldn't keep down any food anymore. And they then diagnosed me. They should have done it 13, 14 years before when the symptoms started, and actually done a test with a thyroid disease. I had Graves' disease, which
Mm.
caused hyperthyroidism, and it was extreme. So I was, it needed to be treated. I had to have block and replace and radioactive treatment, and then full thyroidectomy. But there's, I forgot what we were talking about with this, but there's a lot of, I mean, that was
The
interesting.
autism and the high increase in it over time, and
Yeah,
uh,
I think there's a lot of this. There's a lot of external factors we don't know about with thyroid diseases. They've also like raised up exponentially as it's gone along, and that's not just better diagnosis either.
Mhm.
1 in 50 women will be diagnosed with hyperthyroidism every year. That's a pretty significant number.
Yeah.
Women should be concerned about that. Why is that happening? It's to do with radioactivity in the air, likely because of all of the tests that they've done over and over by blowing up the earth, and then they blame us for the pollution
But this
around. And
speaks to it's kind of my wheelhouse of a larger issue of what I think is happening to us as like a human race. Is like all these increases are because of something that's in our environment that wasn't there before, that is causing this either through genetics or just exposure, that we see an increase in cancer rates. I mean, we can just go across the board, everybody's unhealthy here. You know what I mean? 70% of people are considered obese in America. I mean, that's unbelievable if you think about it. When you see photos of people in the 1950s or 40s in America, they're all fit, they're all skinny. You know, they don't have this processed food diet that we're on. Um, Autoimmune diseases, like I said, are skyrocketing. Like you said, the hyperthyroidism, the grave
that's what I
disease.
had, is an autoimmune disease. So, loads of people get them all of the time, and it seems to be very much something about what they're pumping into us, what we're eating, what we're consuming, rather than necessarily only environmental factors. It is a
The
I,
consuming part is, yeah, I think is the key there, because all of our food is sprayed with insecticide, right? That's been proven to cause cancer. You know, they
microplastics everywhere.
microplastics. What's the BPHA? I think it's called as well. That's causing fertility drops. Also, that too, as you see that fertility has been cratering all over the world as well. So there's a reason for that as well. And it's most likely have to do with the products that we are ingesting and being mandated to take, and over time that effect, we're seeing it right in front of our eyes, but people just don't want to do anything about it. Like, what are we going to do? Just let them kill us all off? You know what I mean? That's why I try to get a level of optimism with this uh, RFK thing, because I think he can steer the gigantic bureaucracy boat in a direction, giving people more healthy food, incentivizing those types of behaviors and things like that, because people will do it, as we know, if the government says it, right? People will
Oh
pretty much walk
yes,
off a cliff.
it's
So if we can
completely
actually have a
extraordinary.
positive steering of the boat in any way possible, I'll be happy with it. But again, I share some of your skepticisms, and I'm not a big government guy. I pretty much hate the government. So I don't put my all my chips on them to do anything positive. But trying to stay I just think this issue is way bigger than people actually realize it is. It's right now.
So, question.
Mm-hmm.
You got independent safety reviews. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
there's a moratorium, there's independent safety reviews. You talk about conducting placebo trials. So what would that mean? What do you think the result of that would be? Because that is the moment, right? I would say, if you were fighting a tactical battle of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
then you'd be saying the moment when the enemy will be most exposed will be the moment that placebo trials have been agreed. Proper placebo trials. What does a proper placebo trial mean, and what do you think would be the result of that?
That means basically you are using an inert saline placebo that doesn't have a bioactive component to it. Even an inert saline placebo does cause some biological effects, right? But it's not going to cause a lot of the things that we see just for common reactions to vaccines, rashes, fevers, things of that nature. But there's also so many things that we don't see that is going on in people's bodies that manifest themselves down the line as well. But to your question, it would be measuring, doing an actual scientific study where they're giving somebody the vaccine and they're giving a saline placebo to the control group. And these are kids too, but that's another aspect of this that's hard to do in an ethical manner too.
Mhm.
And they'll always say that we can't do that because they'll always say that the vaccines have been proven safe. So you can't give them, a saline placebo because
Isn't
then
it
they could be
easy?
exposed.
Yeah, that's why we need a moratorium. So
Right.
then there needs to be the people who, there's got to be a lot of people, and there's got to be a lot of people who are so down with the system so stuck in the establishment narrative that they'd be like, I'm happily test the
Oh, there's
vaccines on
definitely.
my
Yeah, yeah.
children because that's what I want to do anyway, and
Yes.
that's my free will. And okay, so you could get to study groups,
Hmm.
100%, no
Hmm.
problem at all. You could get to study groups, but what would this mean? For what would be, I mean, I think
What
we
do I
have
think
the
the
same
result of this
idea
would be?
result would be, but what would that mean for the vaccine industry, the big
I'm of
pharmaceutical
the
giants?
conviction if this was actually done in a serious, independent way, with all the data and everything transparently available to the public, right? I know. Again, if that was actually done, it would cause this industry to collapse because
Mhm.
people would say we have to pull these off the market. This cannot be given to everybody again, and we got to eliminate that blanket liability protection and reconsider everything. That's ultimately what my hope would be, because I firmly believe that if they did actually do this, that would be the result of it, which is actually what I want to happen. Right.
Mhm.
So, like you said, make them prove it. They're not going to be able to prove it if it's actually independently done, and that is going to cause collapse in confidence. Even if they did keep them on the market, people who actually looked into it would say this is not a safe thing to give to your kids. It should be illegal, actually.
And vaccines have to be given en masse to be effective anyway. So it's not like as soon as they've been undermined, they have been undermined. They have been.
Well, there's a lot of data that shows that vaccines aren't actually responsible for the decline in diseases as well. You know what I mean? Whenever you look at, there's various historical charts people's put together that shows at the point in which vaccines were actually implemented in society, the almost all of the major diseases were 95% eliminated already due to proper hygiene, better working conditions.
And
Uh,
if they want that to stand, they've also got to accept the same sort of like anecdote. It's evidence. I'm saying there's some level of anecdotal evidence about it because it's like only one angle to it all. But it's like the increase of autism. They'd have to accept that that's the same sort of evidence you're
well, they
looking
only
at.
use correlation as causation whenever it benefits them, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like the global warming thing. If you say anything that kind of destroys their argument, they'll say, well, correlation doesn't imply causation, but when it comes to CO2 and global warming, it does cause, they go along with that and they go against what they would say to you otherwise. So it's all these arguments. It's just to suit their political position, and to continue the gravy train that is pharmaceutical industry and the control mechanism that it places on society. Because there's a whole psychological aspect to this that I find fascinating. That it's almost like you're implicitly giving the government control over you and your kids' bodies, right? If you're saying, "Hey, I trust you to put this," a newborn baby's going to be injected with Hep B
You just
vaccine.
literally sent a shiver down my spine.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, for
Oh
instance,
yeah, yeah.
on day one, they're injecting hepatitis B vaccines into children. How do you get hepatitis B? Shared drug use, needles, sexual intercourse.
Unbelievable,
That's how
isn't
you
it?
do it. And they
Unbelievable.
argue that, oh, we have to. They test the mother for Hep B before giving birth, right? So they know that the mother
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
have it.
yeah. Unbelievable.
Guess the amount of days post marketing surveillance they did on the Hep B vaccines that are given to newborn babies every single day. How many
I
days did they think was sufficient for them to see if there was something that was a safety concern?
Anywhere between 30 and 90. But I'm even willing to say less.
4 and 5 days, respectively.
Oh,
So think
wow,
about
wee,
this.
wow, woo.
Every baby in America is they try to they'll, if you say no when you give birth, they'll be pissed at you, and
They'll give
they
you bloody hepatitis.
they'll say no, you
Whatever.
need to do this, like this is something you have to do, like, and try and force it upon you and pressure you into doing it. So they're doing this to every person. A human being is literally foisted into the world by their mother. Within an hour they went to inject hepatitis B vaccine into this newborn baby, and they only took 4 to 5 days in order to determine that it was safety to give to every baby born indefinitely in America.
Wow. It's unbelievable. I stand in the park near me 3 4 years ago during 3 years ago, say during the pandemic. I don't know, 3 4. God, man, time travels so quickly. A few years ago, standing there listening, like trying to argue with people about vaccines, and oh my God, there's so much like pushback on it.
Religious, like.
Yeah, and then I got to like recently, it was two ladies in the park I was talking to, and I was just telling them off for still going to get flu vaccines when they're like something like 60% effective, and they do a lottery of what they're actually going to give you. They don't even know
Hmm.
if it's going to work, and it's like you
But it
got
makes
to
billions a year, though.
yeah, and they're taking on the risk of it. I was like, you're just risking yourself. You come back, every single one of them come back ill. They come back the
Hmm.
next day, they're ill. And so to prevent getting illness, they're going to make themselves ill where they probably are going to get a different strain anyway, and your immune system is going to be lower. And it all doesn't make sense unless, of course, you want to sell something. And I remember these two women very recently who they went into a different mode. They went into like stare into space and hope for the best.
Whenever you're trying to tell them about it, like
They're done. I mean,
they can't allow themselves to let that enter their consciousness.
this is the thing
It's
with
what
such a
what did
visceral
Orwell called
event.
it? Orwell called that crime stop or something like that, where like
Mhm.
you won't allow an opposing view to even enter your consciousness because that could cause cognitive dissonance and make you uncomfortable. That's the level of mind control around this particular issue that we have worldwide. Really, I mean, especially in America and the UK. That I mean, those our public health agencies are essentially the seller of these things. They there's a revolving door too between the people who study them and manufacture them and the people who regulate them. So it's a complete revolving door there. And since when is the CDC supposed to be marketing the drugs that they're supposed to be recommending?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
people don't think about that. All you see is safe and effective. So there's no way to reverse this inertia and this ideology of vaccinations within the federal government, and also when there's billions of dollars on the line from the manufacturer's perspective, is an immense task. But we have to talk about it and let people know what's actually going on, because again, you're injecting the stuff into people you love.
The little babies, mate. I just don't
It just
understand it.
boggles the
It's
mind.
just, yeah, it does. It just, it's been going through my mind now for plenty year that I've been looking at babies going, bloody hell. I hope they're the ones who survive or get through it, because it really is just like a death race, isn't it? At the beginning of life, you come into the world and you're going to be given all of the potential to harm you. And who would think of a system like this apart from the most Malthusian Fabians you can imagine out there? And then
Exactly.
that's where we end up. Now, the other element of this that you talk about within the article is like VAERS systems, the reporting system. So this is the
Hmm.
second way. If they haven't already fitted us up with the way that they manipulate the studies, then the next thing is the response to see if their studies were correct is like only 1% or something of people who actually have the issues
Hmm.
will like note them down officially and report them on the VAERS system. So that's obviously a fit up, because you
Hmm.
can't accept only one. You'd have to automatically say that 1% is a sample figure and that it should be
Much more is happening.
inflated.
Yeah.
Yeah, inflated 100 times. That's insane. So what could take the place of something like this, do you think?
Well, they deliberately created the shittiest system possible with VAERS. You know what I mean? I've went on there just to kind of get a sense of the interface and things like that, and it's it's like 2002 level technology. You know what I mean? As far as software goes, I think it's deliberately made that way because
Mhm.
there was a study, it's from Harvard Pilgrim, that determined, as you just said, that 1% of all adverse reactions and serious adverse events are reported through VAERS. Because there's also been this kind of stigma around it, where doctors, they made it so difficult, it's so time consuming to go in and put that in. And also doctors will automatically dismiss it too. If you come to them and say, I think it was a vaccine. Look, my kid was perfectly fine. Now he's drooling and he hardly talks. They'll immediately discount it as being the vaccine because they're trained to do that, right? Because they're safe and effective. So to even get to the point where you have a doctor input that or a nurse input that is overcoming a lot in itself. But if you only have, like you said, 1% of all these adverse reactions in there, think about the scope of that then, and then the argument is, whenever you bring this up to somebody who's has a religious fervor around vaccines, they'll say, well, those are self-reported, that you can't trust that. Anybody could go in there and type that in, but that is true because that's the system's designed that way because they're trying to create, well, they say they're trying to locate signals within the data to understand whether or not things are going bad with these particular products people are injecting into them. So, and also, why the hell would they make a system that's so inept? And why wouldn't they pay attention to it in the first place? Do you think there's an army of anti-vax people who wake up in the morning and just say, I'm going to put in all this fake shit in here just to create my narrative that vaccines are dangerous? Like, it doesn't happen. It takes 25 to 30 minutes to input all the information because you have to have the lot numbers, all the details of it in order to actually make a valid report. And they have a system in place because I did a thread on this that went viral because I was tired of people like discounting VAERS, the data that we're seeing in VAERS, especially the signals around the COVID vaccines. But if you look through the history in that thread, they have people in place who look at everything that's been put in there and they determine whether they feel that it is valid, and they'll leave it in there. And they'll remove the ones that are kind of miscellaneous or haven't been filled out correctly. So there is a process in place. People just don't want to admit it. Like people who are on the side of vaccines are safe and effective, they want to cover their eyes and close their ears because they don't want to face that data that's there. They just want to say that there's a conspiracy that people are actually putting fake shit in there. That way, they have so much against vaccines that they just want to flood it with fake data, right?
Yeah. I've seen it happen. I've seen it. I mean, we all have. We've all seen it change as well. We've all seen the whole feeling of behind vaccines change. And I would say, like, before COVID, at least even at its peak, it would have been like 10% were against vaccines and 90% were for, and I think it's much more like 60% are against vaccines now, and it's dropping because people are starting to see there's loads of holes in the system, loads of questions to be asked. Yet some people get caught up within medical fallacies, clever medical fallacies as well. Like with the lateral flow tests, when there's a lot of background noise, it means it'll show up people who once were infected but aren't infected anymore, and that really, like, it makes it basically no better than chance. Eventually, I read this brilliant paper, that a study that was done that said basically it becomes 50-50. It's just like tossing a coin. You don't know if it's right.
You're talking about the PCR test that we used for like
lateral flow. Yeah, the different types. You had the PCR and then you had the lateral flow. And a load of people. I had this one argument with one lady in the park who was a nurse who said she's like it's 96% effective. It's like, no, it's 96% effective before it's a pandemic, or at the beginning of the pandemic. At the stage we were in, it's no better than chance, But you have to have all of this information. Like when I had that argument, so I went away and looked at it all, and then I'm able to regurgitate it much better later. But
there's so much technical knowledge that you need to have in order to actually speak cogently about these tests and things like that. And I mean, I have a cursory understanding, and I understand the fraud that was placed upon us with the PCR test and the way that it inflated the numbers and the cycle thresholds. People need to understand that. And also they need to understand the industry that popped up overnight around COVID testing, right? Drosten, the guy who actually said the PCR test worked and supposedly designed it to be able to detect SARS-CoV-2, while he was doing that and got his paper approved in under a week for worldwide use for PCR, he had a COVID at-home test that he was, putting out there. So he profited immensely on this fraud.
There was a lot of this. I remember investigating. It was a really bizarre investigation. I never wrote it up. I was investigating this girl who was commentating on a lot of the Epstein stuff, but was seemingly purposely like putting out or projecting some form of, ritualistic bent to her manner. It was a lot. It was like a conspiracy wrapped in a conspiracy, talking about conspiracies. And I kind of like looked at her life a little bit, did a little bit of investigating, and ended up finding this guy who had also he had worked for Drexel Burnham Lambert, the biggest like fraud in American history, the Michael Milken one. That loads of other people, including Nigel Farage, was part of Drexel Burnham Lambert. Everybody who was involved was a consummate professional at being a fraudster. That's one thing about Drexel Burnham Lambert. You could smell a fraudster. And I found this guy who had worked for them, and it was like in November he had started purchasing masks and tests and stuff. They knew, they told like all of their buddies who wanted to make a quick buck, you're going to have to look at investing in tests and masks and all of these different things that will be put into mandated. And lots of people made a buck during that period. I'm sure that in the future we'll find many more different people who did the same sort of thing. But
well, we're seeing the emergence of that type of industry coming with the bird flu that they keep on trying to talk about, right? So I'm sure if we scratched under the surface and started looking at bird flu test makers, at home test makers, and different type of PPE, that we'd find some interesting things, because that's a narrative that they continually keep in the news. You know what I mean? As you see, every few days you see something. Oh, another human being has contracted bird flu. But don't worry about it. We just want to let you know somebody got somebody. Oh, a guy died from bird flu, but he had all these comorbidities that we're not going to tell you about. But it was the bird flu. So be scared of the bird flu.
I think it was 2006 or 2007, and Neil Ferguson predicted that 200 million people would die of bird flu in China very soon after, and it was something like 900 or some minuscule figure. And there's a difference between organizing a potential outbreak that hits 200 million and one that hits.
And it's always Oxford, right? They go to him for that, and he's always wrong about it. I think he was, if memory serves correct, he actually had a panic about, was it pigs in the UK, and they had to slaughter a bunch of pigs because of his modeling.
That was like around foot and mouth time when they were slaughtering the cattle, but they were also there was he was trying to like expand it out even more and make it so that they could murder more species, and of course that was terrible. That was 8 million cattle burnt on pyres in a way that was just like systematically they threw testing out the window. They just said they used to do ring for foot and mouth disease. They used to do ring testing, so they start like something like at the center of exposure, and then work 3 kilometers out and find all of the cattle in that range. And it's
a nasty disease.
That's all, but it's always worked. This was different because they released it, or it got released in about November, December the previous year, and just like in COVID, and was allowed to spread around, and then was blamed on one farmer. And that, I mean, those guys then took control. You've got not only Neil Ferguson, Jeremy Farrar, Edward C. Holmes, who was part of transcribing the SARS-CoV-2 virus into English after the Chinese had on what was January the 11th, 2020, and all of the gang. I mean, these guys have been doing it for such a long time, and they've fitted up the game. One of these guys' mentors during the time when Jeremy Farrar and Edward C. Holmes were surprisingly at Oxford, a place where they all end up being when they're British. It's Harvard in America, it seems. It's like that.
Chatham House.
Yeah, they all revolve around the same sort of like Rhodes Scholars.
Yeah, no.
those type of guys.
The globalists.
Yeah, the Royal Society boys. But they had Richard Sykes, and Richard Sykes, of course, was really mapping out everything, including the platforms for sharing evidence. That was something that he really helped develop during the late
Mhm.
90s. And it's extraordinary how many of these guys were involved with these sort of outbreaks and how they
It's
become
interesting you said
central.
sharing evidence there. Just sorry to interrupt, but it makes me think about how a pandemic can be a panic can be caused because of the way communications are these days. You could say somebody in Africa died from Ebola, and it could be around the world in like a second. Before, even when it came back to like the swine flu kind of panic that they created, that was 2008, 2009. But now it's so instantaneous in the way social media works and stuff
Hmm.
that you can actually engineer like a psychogenic pandemic. I think we saw a lot of that aspect with COVID, where a lot of people, and they've like governments in the United States, UK, they've done studies on psychogenic illnesses and case studies about how people thought that they were sick, and their elevated heart rates and inflammation it caused in their body that was self-imposed based upon information that they believed to be true. So, I mean, I'm interested in your take as far as the COVID pandemic is concerned. How do you think the most of it was psychogenic when you were to boil it down to it? Because the virus itself, and there's a whole other argument with that too, but like most people get it, and it's like a flu-like thing, and you get over it, and you get antibodies, and you're good. But it just seems to me that like I would venture to say that it was such a evilly masterful propaganda campaign that was rolled out worldwide that it caused a psychogenic pandemic worldwide as well.
Yeah, totally. I think the majority of what we were seeing were just psychosis coming out of people who were made to fear. The one thing that kept really like shooting out at me during the pandemic was this sense that no one knew what they were doing, which direction to go, and they were all looking for someone to direct them. And you can see why the dynamic works so well, that the authorities just then enter into action and
Mm-hmm.
systematically direct these lost sheep, because that's what it seems like, is everybody just switches off. There's it happens when you don't I find interesting.
Uncertainty, right?
Yeah, there's this. I remember watching this documentary about a boat disaster and how people were running past people who were just switched off. They just like they said like half the people just seemed to have turned off their brain. They couldn't function. They had never thought about the idea, thought through the process of disaster, thought about escaping somewhere, thought about having to do that. They'd always been protected, so that it become second nature to not worry about these things. And in not worrying, they do not know as well. And I think if you cannot access the part of the brain, if the thing you're talking about is so far removed from what you've discovered or learned through life, like things like vaccines are, we don't get really taught them. They get hidden. You're not allowed to talk about them. So it meant that many more people didn't know. It wasn't just about whether someone's thought about escaping something. It's about whether anybody's thought about what this all really means. And as soon as
Mm-hmm.
they realized it didn't really mean, I think that was a projection of the world standing still and waiting for someone else to do the job for them, because it was just all fear. So that the medical aspect of it was just a way for them to make money and for them
Trojan
to
horse
achieve
and
their aims. But the fact is that the psychological aspect of it is the only reason they're allowed to do all of that. So the
mhm.
psychological aspect is probably the most important
And
aspect
that's
of
what
it.
I'm most interested in, because they're going to try it again. Everybody, I mean, anybody with a brain can see that. Why wouldn't they try it again? They have all the data that they've collected over the years from the COVID pandemic. They know what works, what didn't work. They may have to adjust some things, but I am not very confident that if they said, "Oh no, we have this new novel virus that's spreading throughout the country," and they showed some scary pictures on TV of people falling over again, that people would revert back into it on a mass scale and be willing to go along with the lockdowns and everything again. lot of people argue that they think that that would never happen again because people have woken up to that to some degree. But when you're talking about population scale, I think that 70% again would get in line and walk right off the cliff if they were propagandized.
I talk to loads of people all around the place, and the majority of people didn't have still no idea what to do in one of these crises apart from play along, agree, do what's best for wider society, all of this sort of stuff. And as I've written about behavioral economics and behavioral insight and nudge units, and these things are being created to mean that keeps that 70% plus in line. And while you've got the majority of people all going down with the system, and all of the like levers of power all crunching down on people who dissent, there's not going to be it is always going to be an opening for them using these sort of methods. And it makes me wonder, because then I think to myself, hey, well, that would mean that they would have to see a big disaster coming and need to distract us. Maybe less so that maybe you don't need so much of a motive during the time of fifth generation warfare, and we're really kicking into that now. So maybe they could just throw in this and that, a pandemic over here, a war over here. This is kind of what they do.
Call it
anyway.
A poly crisis.
Yeah, I think that's what we're already living within, is like multiple crises going on all at the same time. It makes me think that it would be when they're most threatened that they're most likely to repeat something that will be noticeable to other people. And so if it was to happen again, I'd think it would be a distraction. And it makes me think, well, was the first one just that as well? And what else was going on at the time? There's massive changes in the financial system. There's massive changes in political systems. You've got this strange crossover where they're about to fix an election. So, I mean, this is something I don't think people have. And if we want to be conspiratorial minded and enter into this realm, we'd say they were about to fix an election. We know they fixed in the election. I mean, yeah, I don't care what anybody says. You look at the amount of votes and over years, all the different.
Are you talking about 2020?
Yeah, 2020. They fixed. They were that doesn't happen all of a sudden on voting. They manage it out. They make
obvious.
Yeah. So if you want to get away with that, you'd need one of the biggest distractions to be happening at the same time that would cause people to be completely and utterly terrified. So
and just so happen to allow you to vote by mail.
Yeah. And bang, bing bong bang, bing bong.
It's kind of crazy. It's kind of.
I think that what we saw was something else that we don't fully understand, and we are all so easily manipulated by something like this, something that causes reaction, visceral anger.
Would you say that the pandemic changed your view on mankind?
No.
So
I think I'd already got. I only about a year before. I'd say about a year or two before, when I was doing certain articles, I was just about to release an article that would leave me being attacked massively over and over again, and no one would be listening anyway, and I'd be able to show all of the facts, but no one would really care that much. I kind of become accepted that people just switch off when the information is too dire.
I had little faith in humanity, but I hadn't seen it in action, and that's what the COVID pandemic did to me. And when I say pandemic, I don't mean like I'm highly skeptical of everything that happened with it. It's just a terminology for it. But I was, and still am, so disappointed in what I saw, the people near me, and people that I've known and grew up with. And remain disappointed in their view of it and what happened. Like that's the crazy part to me, is like we've had all these revelations, all this stuff has come out. If you have an inkling to learn the truth, you have the ability to do it now. All you got to do is go read and look at what happened. There's so much information out there, which could work against it, but you have to actually want to learn the truth. And that's what I found is like, wow, they don't want to learn the truth at all. They're willing to throw out the everything that we were supposedly believed in, as far as the Constitution, freedom, autonomy, just living in a civilized society, that sort of just baseline foundational principles were just gone. Like all it took was 2 weeks, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we let it happen for 2 years. I still remain so just sad and disappointed with what I witnessed, because obviously you and I, some of the people that we know in this sphere, were screaming from the fucking high top, like, no, they are lying about this. Masks do not stop fucking viruses. Do not take the injections. They're going to try to make passports. And we became right after it took us some time to pass when we were proven right. But still, you would think, with all the revelations and all the truth that we know about it, they still do not want to know, or are still willing to dispense with the most fundamental principles that we supposedly believe in as society.
Yeah, that's oh my God. I tell you, this past few years has been really good in one way, which is everybody else is playing catch up, and they've almost caught up on a lot of things. But I think there's a real risk that they can go on to the opposing force to evil, and it's actually just a created Hegelian dialectical, just another one that people then it synthesizes and becomes the thesis, and we're on the same track again, one side fighting the other constantly over and over again. Is one of the biggest issues with vaccines and decision making actually the human ego? Is that what we got a problem with?
It's the weaponization of the ego. It's the individuals who are putting forth these policies and products, preying upon what they know, like you said, behavioral economics and things of that nature. There's been a weaponization of everything. Social psychology has been weaponized, and there's a whole history there that I'm sure you've looked into, where you can trace how they've been studying people, how they've been trying to implement different things on a society-wide scale in order to manipulate them into believing certain things or certain behaviors. So I think ultimately most of our failings comes down to the human ego. You know what I mean? Whether or not we know it is, or it's being pressed upon by outside forces like government policymakers and things of that nature. So it's hard to, it's also like a lemming type mentality. Like I said, like it goes back to like almost Freud, where we want to have a daddy or mommy figure. You know what I mean? Like when it gets deep into our psyche, when you boil it really far down, we want to say, hey, we believe that the government is telling us the truth and we should do this for our own benefit, because they would never lie. They care about us. It's like an externalization of paternalism that we subconsciously put on these government figures. Or look how Fauci became like a cult figure on the left, where they were calling him Saint Fauci and shit. This is one of the most evil motherfuckers who's ever existed. And that's how distorted people's perceptions have become, is that he is looked at as a saint whenever he is a mass serial killer. No. You know what I mean? That's how inverted. It's almost satanic in a way.
I've had multiple shudders down my spine during this conversation. I have to say that. Oh, that's all right. That's just the work we do. So what do you think? Okay, what do you think is going to happen with the RFK hearings? Do you reckon that he's going to get through, or do you reckon they're going to block him?
I actually have a gut feeling that he's going to get through. I do, because I've been noticing something that you've probably noticed too, is that people with Trump now being reelected, all the other hysterics before him being elected, a lot of people are trying to kiss the ring and fall in line now. Yeah. They see it, the writing on the wall, whether you agree with it or not. So I think a lot of them are going to just go along with it, let him put in there. But I think if he does get in there, they're going to make it a living hell as far as what he can or can't do. And they've trying to character assassinate him, try to get him out of there too. I'm sure there'll be all types of fuckery that happens. You know what I mean? But I do have a gut feeling he will get confirmed. But I don't have a gut feeling that he would take the steps that I've heard in my article to actually take the steps that we really, really need to benefit humanity and like the American health system.
Okay, so just we're approaching the end then. What are the steps you think he would take then?
Well, I think it would probably be. I think it, I think I got a sense that there'll be a lot of lip service, and then like saying I couldn't do anything about it. I was hamstrung by the bureaucracy, kind of what most things
Maybe
would
a
do when they get in.
sacrifice. Can you imagine the big pharma would sacrifice a couple of their vaccines off the schedule to appease such an actor?
Honestly, I don't think they would.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
that's the problem with this situation is like they can't admit they're wrong at this point, man. They're years and years into this shit. They can't say,
Yeah.
"Oh, you've been injecting these in your kids for 30 years." Like, "Oh, sorry, it was our bad. We didn't do these studies the correct way. We've made billions of dollars every single year, guaranteed recurrent income, and the government has acted as our marketing arm in order to, coax you guys into doing this." So it's a battle that's it's a tough battle to get over whenever you take into account the mass amounts of power and money that is behind all this stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm
Immense.
a little bit skeptical that we're going to see that solid change, but I want to be optimistic and sit back and let unfold. But based on history, you usually have to say probably not much is going to change.
I have to say one thing I like about your writing, and the same within this article that you've done for Zero Hedge, is that it's balanced. I like balance, and you don't seem to go too far one way or the other. In you seem to stick fairly in the world of the real, in the realm of what we're going to get, and
Mm-hmm.
what the real issues are, and whether they're going to be tackled or not. I appreciate that about you, Josh. I
Thank you.
appreciate that you're you're straight down the line, my friend, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast as well. What's next up for you then? Have you got another article you're working on that you can give a little sneak
I've got a
preview of?
couple that I'm working on. This one I've been working on for seems like a year and a half, but I can't get it together. But I have a lot of disparate like research. It's about this, and I've said this on other podcasts. It still hasn't come out yet, but there's this foundation that's called the Disarm Foundation.
Hmm.
Um, it ties into these misinformation networks that are supposed to be combating misinformation on a worldwide scale. And this arm, it's called Disarm Foundation. It's an acronym for something I can't remember right now, but they are partnered with NATO, and Europe's a lot different as far as misinformation is
So
concerned, right?
trustworthy, eh?
So, like, yeah, so they're very trustworthy. They're trying to inoculate us against misinformation. So, and that's they use something called inoculation theory, which
Hmm.
is there's a report by NATO as it pertains to misinformation as they see it.
So this is
Basically,
like
stuff they don't want you to
information
know.
theory inoculation. So how to
Yeah, so they
control?
compare
Oh,
vaccines
oh.
to misinformation, which is quite interesting. So
Mm.
I need to dive deeper into the apparatus within Europe, because I think that's the testing ground that could be extrapolated out to American politicians and our establishment want to be able to censor a lot more than they have, and it just so happens that they ran into some roadblocks. But my point is that they didn't just go away. They'll pop up another way and try to shoehorn their censors in another way. So that's something I'm working on. I'm trying to work on a title called "Meet the Censors," something along those lines, because
Mm.
there's individuals who are on this board of this thing that have interesting backgrounds that are being used, a lot of military backgrounds, by the way, that are being used to implement these red teaming and blue teaming of misinformation throughout Europe.
Mhm.
And I think they're going to try and bring that home too. But there's all kind of philanthropies funding it. I can't find any tax returns on them. They're a 501c3. They've been around for 40 years, but there's only been one tax return that's available. That's illegal because you have to actually, and there's no money on the tax return at all. But they have all these resources. So there's something going on there. I just got to get to the bottom of it to really get it all together. But I would be interested in you taking a look at it too, because
Mm.
you have great research skills, and I think there's something there that that needs to be touched upon.
Yeah, I'd be happy to have a look over it. I'm well into seeing if I can find something sneaky, especially about these guys. I feel like I've come across this disarm group at some point, but that tends to happen within research, is that you're looking at which nefarious bastards are doing which nefarious things, and there's a lot of them, and they each need a bit of investigating. I'm currently working on a piece about Mark Carney with the great Dan Fournier, who I love very much. He's a very nice guy, Dan, and found some really interesting information there. I wasn't expecting to look into Mark Carney, but when I did, it was like, oh, that's some dirty, dirty stuff.
You mentioned one earlier too that you have coming out, the multi-part one. What's that one again?
Oh God, there's I don't know, there's a third wave part. Oh, the one that's coming out on Friday is the Tale of Two Ferrars, and
that's the one. Yeah,
Reginald Farrar and his links, or his relationship to Jeremy Farrar to an extent. It's a really good race through history. You go through history, it is going to be much more interesting to people like yourself. And I think I wrote it like that, which I don't think it's necessarily going to be one of those articles that goes around to get read by everyone. People who love indulging in history, people who love a repeated story will like it, but people who want to understand how we got to the place we are today will love it too.
And that's really what you excel at, just to scratch your back a little bit. Like, for instance, your Schwab family values, right? Like before that came out, no one really knew anything about that background at all. They had a sense that, hey, this guy might be a fucking Nazi just because look at him. He dresses like he's on Star Trek and like wants to control the world. But like, you planted a cultural seed with that article, because I remember it went pretty viral. I mean, it was like, oh, this dude has Nazi connections, color me shocked, because the World Economic Forum was very much in the spotlight at that time period. But your writing is so in depth that it influences the way people think about the culture too. And I think that's where you really make your mark, when you make these extensive investigations that take years. You know what I mean? To do all the hard work to do it.
I'd be very happy. I'd be very happy to and remember this at some point. If you want to send me what you've been looking at, I'm really happy to look into it. But there's other things as well. If you ever come across something where you think that there's a whole backstory that you want to look at, but you can't look at, and it's historically sort of leaning, that tends to be my favorite place to go. I love going back through history, so I'm definitely not adverse to helping out on an article.
What resources do you use? Like, what kind of
I mean, of course, the newspaper archives are a really good start, because newspapers didn't really realize what they shouldn't print back in the day. And so if you go back through, and this is, I mean, same for Schwab family values, I had to go through Swiss newspaper archives from the 1800s
and translate them too, right?
Yeah. But I mean, it's pretty, they weren't written down, so I had to like write all the translations word for word, and that took about 6 weeks to translate all of the Swiss stuff to work out where I was, and the German stuff for the Schwab family values article, to understand where he was from properly. But I mean, newspaper archives are a really good place to start, because when they printed it, they didn't think about what they need to hide in the future, and so that'll give you loads of other little points around. But it all depends. It's the Wayback Machine's wonderful, but any information, you were talking about books earlier, where you go into a book, and I think what you were trying to describe is like, you don't have to read book from cover to cover. You are looking, if you're researching, you're looking for, first of all, the line. You find a line that's related to what you're talking about, so you read the paragraph and you're like, well, I need more context. So you read the chapter, and then you read the chapter before, the chapter after, and then slowly you get all of the information about the one part of the subject, and you do that multiple times over as well.
Also, with digital books too, Control F, the F function, you can find, if you have an inclination of a particular topic, keyword search it, man, you can find stuff that you would probably never come across otherwise.
And you have to get books you don't even want to buy sometimes. Ah, sometimes by the worst people in the world, and you don't want to contribute to their success in any way,
Well,
or etc. But if there's not
LibGen
any
is a good
archives,
resource.
well,
Anna's Archive, LibGen. Are you familiar?
no,
Oh,
no. This
so
is the thing I'd love. I mean, I'd love to sit down and cross-reference these sort
yeah,
of
we
things.
should. But
Yeah, yeah.
for pretty much, I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of books that you can find. It's called Anna's Archive. Just search Anna's Archive, and it pulls together multiple open source books online, and you can find pretty much anything on there. I mean, I will go sometimes through history on Amazon list. You know what I mean? Like you can look at the top books, or I'll sort it by like. What I've found is like if you sort books on Amazon by the price, that's usually a good indicator of what they don't want you to read, right?
Oh, you dirty rotten bastard. That's true.
Yes.
I
So
hadn't thought
I'll
about
sort
that
it by a
before.
particular topic and what's the highest priced one, and then cross reference that to Anna's Archive. I've found like $700 books for free on that website
Oh
before.
yeah, okay. I like a bit of that because that thought has come across my mind on multiple occasions when I'm researching, I'm looking for a certain book, and I go and it's like £500 on Amazon. I'm like, what the? That's the exact type
But
of.
it's for free on Anna's
Yeah,
Archive.
that's beautiful. Anna's Archive. I'm on my way. This is a. There's going to be more of this in the future, and there's going to need to be more of this because as we discover new archives, other archives get closed down, and really we are working upon the kindness of strangers at the moment as researchers, and I know that it could all that would if they would be able to control that, then they control all information flow.
I
That
think
would be
you just
worrying.
triggered a thought in my mind, just thinking about moving forward from our perspective of investigating and writing, is that one thing that we should end up trying to think about do is collaborating more. You know what I mean? Because cross-referencing, just bouncing ideas off of each other, things like that. Because as writers, you're usually insular and you're by yourself, you're doing the work. But I think opening that up to more collaboration or a coalition or just something, just to bounce ideas off of multiple people, opens new avenues of investigations and just new thoughts and things of that nature. I
Yeah.
think we do get to like, doing this myself, put this out there, but we probably could use our resources together to uncover more things.
I like it. I think it sounds like a book club for
Mm-hmm.
people writing books
Yeah,
rather than for the people reading the books. And I think maybe this is something that if you ever want to do, if you ever want to advice on a certain article, come to me. But I'll also get your advice on another article, and we'll do like some form of book club.
cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good idea. I'm going to think about that and think about how that could be advanced on the public arena as well,
Mm-hmm.
because that would be a really good idea. Maybe to write
Crowdsource it in
things,
a sense.
crowdsource writing. Oh my God. Crowdsource the truth might be the future. Well, right. Well, we've covered a lot, man. Tell people, let people know where they can find you and all the different places that you're currently doing you're applying your trade.
Sure. I have a Substack you can subscribe to for free, or you can get a subscription for yearly if you want. It's called wethefree.substack.com. So all my writings are on there. You can access. I don't think I have a paywall on any of them, so you can go through the archives. All of it's in the same type of vein where I'm trying to uncover truths that people maybe not know about or have preconceptions about. That I'm trying to shatter that paradigm and give them information that will help them think about the world more clearly. And then I'm pretty active on X as well. So you can just follow me there at Josh Walkos, JoshWalkos. And I do a lot of combination between finding interesting old videos and things like that for historical context and my threads. It's kind of a multimedia thing that I'm doing here, and it's moving pretty well. And I'm also writing for Zero Hedge here occasionally as well.
Yeah. I do like Zero Hedge. We had a little bit of an argument. Whoever runs the Twitter account, me and them had a little bicker about something recently, and it was quite amusing. I enjoyed it very much. But I'm proud to see you're getting out there and you're putting your stuff. It makes me feel extremely happy, and I've watched your progression. It's all uphill, and I long may it continue. Josh, thanks for coming on the New Space podcast.
Anytime, man. Pleasure is all mine.
Pleasure is all mine. It's all mine.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed